Hi everyone, and welcome to the next in my series of paint along demos in Soft Pastel. This is number 5 of the series so far, and I'm hoping to add to it over time with lots and lots of different subject matters to challenge you whether you're a beginner in pastel or whether you're already advancing down that path and you want some tips to improve. So the idea of these demos is that you can work along with me. It's all in real time. I'll be chatting as I work, explaining what I'm doing, giving you lots of tips as we go. So I hope that you enjoy this. And if you do, please do remember to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube and go check out all my other playlists. I've got lots of free content here. Then if you'd like to learn even more, come check out my Patreon channel where I have lots and lots of real-time tutorials and also a growing community of great artists who give each other lots of support too. So here's some information that you'll need to know if you want to work along with me. I am using pastel matte paper. I've chosen the sienna colour of pastel matte, and I'm working only 8 inches by 8 inches, so this is quite small. If you're a true beginner to soft pastel, I would suggest that maybe you give yourself an extra couple of inches, maybe 10 inches square. Either way, you'll give yourself a little bit more space to create some detail. I'm really trying to limit myself because I can get so much detail on pastel matte that I'm going to be here all day. So I want to show you as many techniques and not go into too much detail, give you as much information as possible in a reasonable amount of time. I've also chosen a range of unison pastels to use with a couple of Terry Ludwig colours, and I'm going to make a video on why I chose this palette of colours before I started, how I did that, what my thought process was. So there will be an in-depth video coming on that soon. And I also have chosen out a range of Faber-Castell pastel pencils to help with some of the detail. But in using this, you can substitute for colours that you have that are similar, or use a couple of colours together to try and mix something similar. So at this point, I will leave the photo reference of the owl on screen so that you can use this to draw from. You can pause the video here and draw from your screen, or trace, or whatever method you want to use to get your line drawing on your paper. If you're a patron, you can, from my Patreon channel, download the photo reference along with a gridded version, along with an outline, all to help get you started quickly. So I'm going to show you some progress pictures quickly now, just to show you how I got from my photo reference to changing the background, to sketching out my owl first and getting that transferred onto the paper. I decided to change the background in mine, but you can use the same background from the photo reference, or what I really encourage you to do is to try and change it so that you're always coming up with original ideas. And this is just a very simple, out of focus bokeh background using lots of green colours, a bit like in the photo reference, because there are a lot of green reflections on the owl, so I wanted to keep the green theme going. I highly encourage everyone to play around with backgrounds, and if you need some help in doing that, I have some other videos here on YouTube which will show you how to change a background, how to choose good background colours, and I'll add links to those in the description below. So let's make a start on the colour work. And something that we're going to talk about a lot in this piece is the direction of the light. So in the photograph, the lighting is really coming from on the right side of the owl, putting all of this left side in shadow. And when white goes into shadow, often what you find is it reflects a lot of the colours around it. So we're going to get a lot of blues and a lot of greens being reflected within the shadows. And that's what I'm going to start off with, just picking out this this left side of the owl that's most in shadow, mostly because I've got here to lean my hand on, so I often like to start on the left side or at the top of a piece. But I'm going to try and create real contrast between the lit side of the owl and this side that's in shadows. That's how to create that 3D realistic effect. So I'm just using the soft pastel but turning it around, looking for all of these little sharp edges. Just while I'm working on the edges of the owl, I'm trying to be careful and create some of these softer edges where needed. So edges are something that I like to tackle pretty early on in a painting because they're so important. So just looking for where that really vibrant blue is down the left side. And I've tried to make the little areas of background behind these areas so that they'll contrast this blue colour nicely. And the blue just continues up the head a little bit before it starts being hit by light and we get other colours. So what I really want is for this owl to pop out in a 3D way, and it will be the choice of colours that I go for that will help me with that effect. And we'll talk a lot about that over the next couple of hours. I'm really not sure how long this owl is going to take. I like these demos to come in around 2 to 3 hours long, but I haven't done a demo like this on pastel matte before because normally I take much longer on pastel matte. I find it's a little bit slower for me, and I think that's due to the fact that I can actually get lots and lots of detail on pastel matte. You can get into the really fine detail at the end with the pencils, and while that's great, I really like that for certain subject matters. It's why I've chosen it for this little owl. I think it will be perfect for that. But I do like to try and be a little bit more painterly sometimes too, especially in backgrounds. So for me, pastel matte does slow me down a little bit. So we'll see how I get on with this demo. But for now, just to get started, I'm just focusing on this far wing. Just having a look at how my colours are going to work out for the shadows. It's always more tricky to paint the colours within the shadows. As quite often you need to go a lot darker than you first think. And the temptation is to always bring some white into your shadow areas. And the idea really, if you want to create a 3D effect, is to try and avoid doing that, to try and choose other tonal values that better describe those shadow colours. When you really look at them, they're always much darker than you think. So although my brain knows that this wing is white, just like the wing on the other side, I've got to try and ignore that information and just look at what I'm seeing in the photo reference. So just using a little bit of a brown pastel pencil, what's left of it, to bring a bit of that darkness down the front of the chest where it meets the wing. And also for very fine work like this around the edges. Just that little bit of dark featheriness around the edge of that wing. So on pastel matte paper, I really like to use the combination of the soft pastels and then come in with the pastel pencils and neaten what I've done. You'll also see me use some nice little blenders throughout this piece. great tools if you're using pastel mat. So just trying to get the edge of the wing here. That little bit of reflected blue light just coming around the edge of the wing and disappearing under it. So with little tools like this, I can come back in and shape the edges. Everything still moves around nicely after you apply it. I can also bring in a little bit of similar coloured pastel pencil and just use that to flick some of those edges out. So that's getting into a little bit of detail already, and the only reason being that it's around the edge, which is quite an important area, and at this point of the painting I can still lean here in the centre of the owl, so it gives me a chance to get this more fiddly work done while I have a place to lean. So now just looking at how far down the shoulder that blue comes before it starts to gradiate off. Really trying to break the owl up into planes and flatter shapes at the beginning. Just like I did in my drawing process. And even now starting to add in some other reflected colours, as I can see lots of the greens and the blues that are surrounding the owl, especially reflecting in those shadow colours. So I'll often start with the face, and the only reason that I'm not in this case is just to get a little bit below the face done so that I can come in with nice clean edges all around the outline of the owl's head. So I want to get a little bit of colour in before I tackle the face. So if you go over your line a little bit, just like I've done there, the lovely thing about pastel is just how versatile it is. How you can come back in and correct things. So although it seems difficult to work with such big blunt instruments like the soft pastel sticks, you've really always got that editing ability after you've applied the pigment. So for the time being, I'm really not looking at any of the details on the owl, just around the edges perhaps. But as for any of the markings on the feathers, any of the dots, all of that stuff I'm going to add later. So I'm trying to imagine that there are no dots or markings on the owl at this stage. Just looking for the overall tones that are going to describe the 3D form, and trying to get colours blocked in, working my way around the edges here to begin with, just looking at where the light source begins, where it dips into shadow, where I need to use warmer colours or cooler colours. So that's really what I'm analysing at the moment as I work my way around the edge. And of course this is actually quite a light coloured brown earth, so quite a lot of orange or yellow in this, and a great opposite for the owl itself. So thinking of opposite colours, they are notoriously good for depicting light and shade. I've got a growing series on my YouTube channel all about colour theory, explaining what I mean by opposite colours and showing you how you can use that information to apply it to your own work like this. And later on, hopefully, I will have time to come back in and add a lot of the smaller details to the owl. Hopefully I will get some time to create some of that nice smaller detail in the markings. But my first aim will be to try and get some blocking in done, try and get some colours laid down. And just coming around the head is a great way to have a look at how light really changes as it travels around this white, well, globe of a face. It's quite a good exercise if you're trying to practice really capturing light and shade. White is always a tricky one to work on, so this is a good exercise to help you see more colour. So some of those orange brown earth tones, just a little bit darker over on that side of the head. But as I said, I'll go into more detail on the head itself. For now, I'm just happy to get some colours blocked in, have a look at the outline, this edge of the head. I can come back in from my background a little bit just to help to shape that. Of course, I don't want to leave an outline around the owl's head, so I'll always try and soften that down again. But even at this stage there are some lovely little flicks where the feathers are just poking out from the head here. And I take this opportunity while I can lean on the rest of the piece just to add a few of those in. So making use of some of my shadow colours from my light and shade unison set. You'll find that no matter what you go to paint, it's always good to have a little range of off shades, things that aren't quite white. Colours that you find difficult to describe, those are usually the ones that come in very useful in your painting. So I'm just initially trying to get a little bit of this shadow underneath the head in, because I feel like it's going to help me see the colours on the face more clearly. It just helps me initially see how dark I need to go in some of the darkest parts of the shadows. And I'm already just starting to think about how some of the light and shade here on the front of the bird really describes the form and the shape. So there's this lovely little bit of outline on the owl's face. And we just see it in some areas where the face feathers aren't covering it. And it really tapers off as it comes up the side of the face where we come into the stronger light. So let's start having a look at the face and what attracted me to this photo reference. I took this photo last year when I went to visit a falconry place. I took lots of pictures of lots of different wild birds, but what I really liked about this little white coloured owl was just how those shadows played across every part of the owl's body and the interesting shapes that you get from the shadows. They're really pronounced in this, which is why I think it's a good one to have a go at painting. Any photo reference that's got really good pronounced shadows tends to make a really interesting painting. So just having a look at where the shadows fall on the face. I really liked the shadows down this side of the nose that are being cast on the bottom of the face. And this shadow that comes right down the side of the face here. All of these shadow shapes really help me in the drawing stages too, because they give you good definite shapes and planes to go for. Anything that you're trying to draw or paint that's got really flat lighting, that's going to make it much harder because it gives you very little structure to grasp onto. So try when you're choosing photo references, choose something with good contrast in it, good lighting that you can see lots of shapes, and try to avoid things that look really flat. So when painting white areas that are actually quite exposed, being hit by the sunlight, you're really trying to look in between the white feathers, the white marks, or whatever it is. So trying to see what the colour is that white is really showing up against. And quite often it will be like a neutral grey. You might be able to see some hue in it, like a lilac or a blue, maybe a yellow. That's really what you're looking for, that lower layer where you can see another colour, not just white. And that's the colour that I need to come in with first, so that my white has something to show up against. If I just come straight in with some white highlights, then it gives me nowhere brighter to go later on. And so far I haven't really been thinking about the direction of the feathers, but on the face with some of my marks I will try and suggest that direction even when I add this lower layer in. So just starting to think about how the marks will fan out later. And I chose the sienna coloured pastel matte as I thought that would add a nice warmth to the end effect, so if any of that shines through, I'm okay with that. Even though I tend to cover the paper entirely, you still get some sense of the tone of paper that you used underneath. It does add some kind of little tint to it. So just thinking about the structure of the bird when making my marks, looking at where the feathers get shorter as they come in towards the eye. Trying to think about the disc shape of the face. It's not entirely flat, there's a lot of shape to it. And apologies if you can hear a dog snoring in the background. One of them is snoring. I'm surrounded by 3 sleepy dogs. And hopefully I'm not putting you guys to sleep in the same way that I am with them. You also might be able to hear some wind outside. I live in a particularly windy town, so inevitably some days when I'm recording audio there will be some wind as background noise. So this side of the face is really where it's going to have the most white on it. Really lit up. But just adding those little hairs or feathers that I can see in between all the white. And it doesn't matter if I keep those marks really defined, they're really just a rough idea at this stage. So each of the layers, even on pastel matte, like I do on the velour paper that I like, I do a lot of blending. I rub the layers in so that it's not sitting loosely on the paper. By rubbing it in, it allows the paper to take a whole fresh new layer. So hopefully the aim of this painting today will be to show you that you don't have to go into super crazy amounts of detail to get a 3D effect, to build up a really nice painting in soft pastel.
So just bringing in a few little bits of white highlight now as a start, just so that I can start to see how much brighter that white is going to look in comparison to all of my other values. And you can see just how much brighter that's going to be. So just looking for some of those little feathery edges around the face. And I won't go too crazy with the highlights at this stage. I really just want to start and pick out a couple of edges here and there, just to start and see the full colour range on there together. So I'm usually saying that I work dark to light, and as a general rule that's true, but quite often I do come in with some early highlights, or it really will depend on the image and what I think I'm going to struggle with. So in this case I really want to see the full tonal range as quickly as possible, and then start judging all over where I need to add more of each tone. So with the white it's going to be more minimal than you would think, and you can see already that it's difficult to keep the other areas of the piece clean, so that's why I work up here so that I can gradually work down. You can see just how grubby the rest of this is going to get as I work. Some really lovely light and shade across the nose. You get one side that's really getting a lot of the light, and then the other side just dipping down into shadow. So a real nice way to split the face in half. And help create that 3D effect. So if you've chosen to work a little bit bigger, you're going to find that you've got a bit more space for some detail if you like. I'm really going to try and limit myself and not go into crazy amounts of detail. Really want to try and just create the effects without having to paint each and every little feather. And I think the only way to limit myself on Pastel Matte is to work a bit smaller, so that's what I'm doing. So let's just get in the shape of the nose again quickly. And of course we've got quite a lot of shadow just in around the top of the beak. Of course it's a beak, not a nose. just really darkening down that other side of the face. So just looking for this little indent that's very interesting on this side of the face, very important to the overall structure. Just picking out one or two little areas down that's been caught by the light. You can just see this little edge of almost frilly edged feathers here on the face. So trying to be minimal with the white there, but some little areas just catching the light. And just a lovely shape on an owl's face, how concave these areas are. Lovely creature to sit and look at. So just picking out where the light, those lighter areas come down this side of the face. So hopefully even already with this small amount done, you can start to see some idea of the light and shade. Once we start to bring in more of the white highlights now in the face, it should really start to stand out more. So again, looking for those frilly edges around the face. I do intend to come back in with some pastel pencil too and try and add a bit more detail to this. But I think it's possible also to be a little bit suggestive with these and not worry too much about the detail. As I said, on this scale I'm really not going for absolutely every little feather. And just noticing this crease down the middle of the face. Be really careful with this on any animal. Really pay attention to the direction that the hair or feathers or whatever it is, really notice the direction that the hair is coming to create that effect. So in this case they're really meeting in the middle like two seas crashing together, and that's what's going on down the center of the face. And you can see all these little white marks that I'm making. You can still see that first layer of colour just more subtly through the white marks. And whether it's fur or feathers or whatever it is you're painting, it's just about noticing the pattern of the marks that you can make to get the same effect. And of course quite a lot of this vibrant colour down the side of the nose, this brown earth. So I will probably work on the eyes pretty soon. I don't want to completely lose my outline of those, as on this scale it's quite tricky. And I think I've got the eyes pretty good in the sketch, so I don't want to lose that entirely in the painting process. But just picking out a little bit more light on this side of the face. And then sweeping those marks out towards the edge of the face, so bringing them down from the eye and watching how they sweep out towards the side. So really following each little direction, as all of that is going to really help describe the whole shape and form of whatever animal it is that you're painting. So direction of fur, and therefore direction of your marks. That's something that I'm always talking about as well. So this is something different for me. I haven't painted an owl before. A bird I really love, and there are so many different types of owls. I'd really love to paint a tawny owl. But I do love painting light coloured subjects, and I think that they make really good tutorials because it's something that we all struggle with. So try to really think about the size of your marks. Take your time, don't be in a rush. I think that's the main advice that comes from a lot of art tutorials. If you want to create something that's very lifelike, realistic, then you just got to put the time in. There's no avoiding it. So as well on this side, I'll just pick out a few little hints of highlight which are going to just help bring that face a little bit more 3D before I tackle the eyes. I'm just noticing where those marks really stop being bright white and turn more into a cooler highlight color as it comes close to the shadow. So really thinking about my highlight colors. Considering each time whether it's truly necessary to use pure white. So like I said earlier, just look out for where those marks come up and meet in the middle. And just following the form. And I'm not sure if owls have eyebrows, but it's certainly that part of the face that we associate with the eyebrows, up over the brow of the eye. Important places on the owl because it's that whole concave effect that we're trying to get so that the face doesn't look entirely flat. So I was just using a little bit of pastel pencil to try and work the edges of the face a little bit. Just get that lovely little heart-shaped effect. So I'm going to focus in just on the head area for a little while. Work on some of the main features. Just first of all, lightening the side of the head a little bit. Starting to show how the light comes across the top of the head. Creating this little dimpled area in the middle. But also just starting to get a feel for how the feathers start to flow back from the face. And how those sweep around the head until they eventually come around in here, where I will use a slightly more lilac tone. As those marks come around into the shadows a little. So all of these lighter tints that you see me using, so useful. I make use of such a range of light tints in every painting. And again, all the little flecks and dots, I think I'll leave those until later. Just focus on the main bulk and shape of the bird. And worry about all that extra information a bit later. So sometimes I'm using pretty small pieces of pastel. If you have brand new pastels sitting in front of you, this should be good enough inspiration to get breaking them. Take the papers off first, break them up into smaller pieces when you need to. Don't be afraid to really get them used and broken. That's exactly what they're for, and they become more and more useful and usable as you use them and break them up. So it's not something that I've sat and intentionally done with many of my pastels. I don't sit breaking them up, but just as I use them, I'm not afraid if I need to break one. I know that that's just going to create a very useful couple of pieces for other jobs. But I do know that they look lovely in their boxes when you first get them, and it's difficult to be rough with them. My best advice is to start and keep a chart of all the different colors that you buy, so that you can take their papers off and not worry about it. You know that you've got a record of that color. And they really do last for ages, so just by breaking them down, you're not going to make them disappear faster. I have many little useful crumbs that I call upon all the time. So in this little shadowed area here, just trying to add in some highlight colors without ruining the shadow effect. So taking my cooler blue, starting to look for that edge coming up around this side of the head. And of course, when things just become a little bit too small, I can always come in with pastel pencil. Just get a little hint of that lovely texture of the ruffled feathers over there around the edge of the head. Just some little parts of it catching the light here. but really trying to leave some of those shadow colours shining through. And anywhere that I feel I've lost a bit of the definition, I can come back in now, darken it down a little bit, anywhere where there's little indentations. And of course in around this eye that's over on the shadow side of the face, quite a lot of shadow just in the eye socket here. Just really neatening up that little area of shadow there. It so describes that indented part of the face. So there really are some areas that I put a lot of effort into, perhaps because they're important areas for describing some part of the form. You can see, just without having to do absolutely like the photo reference every single little feather, you can already start to get the effect of those feathers just with a little bit of detail here and there. And I think it's just all about being selective about the detail that you include, judging whether it's important. Or whether you can be a little bit more suggestive or a bit more loose in that area. So I think with this amount done, I will have a look at the eyes and the beak area, try and get the main features in. And I've purposefully gone on this scale so that I can't go into too much detail on those main features. I'm hopefully going to be able to show you how to build them up pretty quickly. And if you're working on a larger scale, you can spend a little longer on those features. But what I'm really trying to show you is how to create an overall painting with good color harmony, with good lighting. And there are lots of videos to show you in-depth eyes and close-ups. But what I really want to show you is the overall picture in creating a full painting. And also to inspire you to get creative with backgrounds, really making things more your own. Mixing and matching photo reference. Or your imagination, of course, if you're good with that. I kind of like having some little bit of reality and a photo reference to follow. But there are many artists who can come up with great ideas for backgrounds just out of their heads. But I stick with the photo reference, and I'm always thinking about backgrounds when I'm out with my camera. A good tip is to, if you have a dog or an animal of some description, I use one of my dogs for this. I get her to pose, and then I can take pictures of her with nice backgrounds that are out of focus, and it already gives me some idea of what scale an animal would be in that scene. So it's very easy for me to create a background for a hair painting, for example, just swapping the hair in for where I have my dog posing. And I've already got an animal in the lighting of the scene that I want. So all of that helps when it comes to try and change the photo reference. So just getting the outlines again of the eyes. Good sharp pastel pencil. And the pencils do go on really nice on pastel matte paper. So just getting those dark outlines again, making sure I've got the proportions of the eyes correctly, have them placed nicely. It's an animal that I haven't drawn before, so the eyes are very different. And of course there are some really spectacular owl eyes. But in this case, they're not going to be quite as complicated. And that's another reason why I chose this photo reference for this demo, so that I won't get lost in a load of detail in the eyes. And it's more about creating the full scene, the overall lighting. But hopefully I can get enough detail in these eyes to pick up on some of the lovely character of this little bird. So a lot of the work around the eyes will happen with the pastel pencils, especially on this scale. Can't beat those fine points for stuff like this. So this other eye is really in the dark. Really can't see a lot of detail in there. Just a little bit of reflection catching the outer part of the eyeball. And so a lot of this other eye is going to be pretty dark black, although I will add a little bit of brown in there as well, just to warm it up a bit. And if this were a commissioned piece or a different animal, I could always open this photo up in Photoshop, lighten this eye, try and make out a little bit more detail in it. But because of the scale and because of it being an animal that I'm not too worried about getting an exact likeness, I'm quite happy to just let this eye be really dark over here. And I'll just come in with this subtle bit of highlight around this side of the eyeball. And just at times when your fingertips are a little bit too big to smudge, those tools are always useful. I use some of the tools that came with my pan pastels, nice soft applicators and almost like makeup brushes. You could also use earbuds, cotton buds. There are a lot of different types of blenders available, and it's definitely useful to have something especially for a very small detail when your fingertips are just a little bit too big to do an important bit of blending. So I can move over to the other eye, get it blocked in, and then I'll be able to see what I need to do to the other one. This one has a bit more detail in it simply because it's facing the light, and that may already be enough detail in the other eye. We'll see when I get this one in. So just looking for that little extra rim of light running around that edge of the eye, something we didn't get on the other side because there's no light hitting in there. And if you hear me blowing a little bit on the pastel piece, it's something that I really only do when I'm working on the eyes. And I'm not really blowing a huge amount of pastel pigment anywhere. You can just see some of the little bits of pigment that have fallen here, a tiny amount of it. And I just give that a quick blow to get it away from the eye that I'm working on. Really, you should try and avoid blowing on your pastel work too much. It sends a lot of dust around the room and it's just not a great thing to do, but I do it at certain points of the painting when it's not going to do very much damage. So really using the point of the black pencil just to find my outlines again once I drop some colour pigment in. Give that a bit of a blur into the paper, get some of the pigment deeper into the paper. So just pushing my lines a little bit, making sure that I've got everything in the right place. Just try and find that outer edge of the eyeball. And of course those big giant pupils in the middle. And of course this eye, catching the light a little bit more, has one real good dot of reflected light on it, and hopefully that should help bring this eye on this side to life a little bit. So just dotting on a bit of soft pigment. If I put on a little bit too much, then I can shape it into place. I think I need to move it just a little bit more to the left. Even when coming in with a little piece of pastel like this, I just test gently first of all if I'm getting the mark in the right place, and then I can lean a little bit harder. So I can't always see exactly where it's going to aim on the paper. So just making sure that the pupil around the highlight is as dark as possible so that it really stands out. And just strengthen up some of the little highlights around the rim of the eye. But again, not a huge amount of detail. Both eyes completed there pretty quickly. And these little eyelashes, which are just catching the light a bit more than the ones on the other side. Just some little details around the eyes which will make a big difference. And you can see now that we have this reflection on this side, I don't need to go into a huge amount more detail over on this eye. That sort of keeps us in line with the lighting as we know coming from this side. So let's quickly have a look at the little beak, and then I'm going to move on to blocking in the rest of the body, as I'm very aware that I don't want to spend 2 or 3 hours just on the face. I want to get this whole bird blocked in, give you an idea of how I create the feathers. So I need to get a move on. And this is what I find every time with pastel matte. Time just seems to fly. Before I know it, I've spent hours on one tiny little area. And it's definitely a great paper if that's how you like to work. But I do want to get more of the overall feel of this bird today. Just looking for the light as it comes down the center of the beak. Remembering that it's got a nice curve to it. And it's a good bit darker on the other side here because it's over in the shadows. And I'm going to bring some of those feathers from the nose area down over the top of the beak, so I can afford to go a little bit darker over here and really help those show up later. This scale, there's really not a huge amount of detail I can add to the beak. What I'm really looking for is just that nice little dot of reflection running down the center of it, and try to pick that out a little bit more strongly with a little bit of soft pastel. But it's pretty small and it's pretty subtle what I'm doing, so as soon as I think I've got it looking just about okay, I'm best not fiddling with it too much more. I think I've got just about enough contrast of it coming off the face. And then to add some of those lighter hairs, using a good sharp pastel pencil. Picking out some bits of the feathers that are really catching the light. So not every part of the feathers here is bright white. I'm really just looking for some little parts of it that I can accentuate, help get more texture into the feathers. So already the face starts to look like it's taking shape, and I think now is a good time to zoom out again and start looking at the bird more as a whole, and try and get the rest of the body blocked in, and then we can really start coming back and adding more detail where it's needed. But for the rest of the face, now that I've really built up the tonal values first, I can go around even with the white pencil and just start to add a bit more texture. Not overdoing it with the white highlights, but certainly in these sunlit areas on this side of the face, I can start to add a little bit more interest or texture to the areas. Of course, as it comes down towards the middle of the face here, we get less and less light, so just always be careful not to bring those highlight colours too far around the subject. Really watch where your light is hitting and keep that nice lighting effect intact. I think that's possibly enough work done on the face for now. Trying to keep the demo pretty short, so I should work on the body for a little bit and get some of that blocked in. So I'm going to start off looking mainly at the shadow areas. Just go all around the body and try and get a little bit of blocking in done. So I'm just picking quite a dark grey, just to darken the front down a little bit. I'll come back in over the top of this colour with other colours, but some of these areas on the front really are quite dark. And like I keep saying, if you want to make those brighter areas really stand out, you've got to have that contrast in there first. So there's a really dark shadow being cast by the wing. I really like this photo reference mostly because of the lighting and how that casts a really nice definite shadow in underneath the wing. And really the darkest area on the bird is right in here underneath the tail feathers. So I will probably come back in here with some black even, just to really darken, strengthen that area. But for now, just doing a bit of blocking in, seeing where the shadow runs to, where I need to come in with highlight colours. So it's really the light and shade that I'm looking for here. those really prominent areas where you can see the divide between the two. I'm just looking for any real sharp shadow lines, like this one that cuts across some of the tail feathers. So this grey seems like a really dark choice, but some of these shadow areas are even darker than this. And it's okay to come in with stronger colours first and know that you can lighten it with your next layers. So there's a lot of reflected light and colour on the front of the bird, but I just want to get some of this nice darkness in first, and then I'll start using some of those blues and greens to bring out some of the reflected colour. But just looking for the form of the bird, so how this part comes down and meets the leg, but then there are extra shadows in here on the chest, just to show the form of the chest and where it comes and meets this shadow that comes down the other leg. So everything should join up from my initial sketch to now when I try to block in those larger areas. Those are just the areas that I was trying to locate when I was sketching this out. And it's really at this stage that you get to see if your drawing was really accurate. I encourage everyone to practice their drawing skills as well. It's absolutely fine if you're learning to pastel and you want to skip the drawing part, trace your image onto the paper and get straight into the pastel work. That's totally fine. But it is really good to keep on top of some drawing skills, as that really helps out your whole painting process too. So what's really going to help this painting start to come to life is when I start to add some of the nice highlight colours, and it's a real fun part of the painting process, just starting to bring out some of those lit edges, and it really starts to give the painting form. So it's really helpful when you've got a photo reference that has good shadows like this. It gives you a lot of anchor points, a lot of areas to compare against each other. Much easier than dealing with a photo reference that's really flat. That's one of the reasons that I really love to paint sunlight. So just getting the nice curves and shapes back on this wing, using the shadow underneath. And then just gradiating that shadow out a little bit. And some of the very darkest areas on the body. So just picking up from where I left off in the beginning when I was starting to add some of the blue around the edges of the bird. Now just starting to see how that bleeds in and around the edge of the body. And I'm not leaning too heavily. I want my marks to be quite subtle, quite soft, and then also give them a little blend into the paper just to soften the whole effect. Really right down that edge, catching a lot of the cooler blues. Once we come into the center of the chest, I can see a lot more warmth in this area. So I'm going to come in with a lighter brown earth. And at this stage I'm really just scuffling some marks through the darker grey, hoping that some of these different colours will show up in the effect. So just trying to get some texture down the front. We've also got a bit of reflected green, just like I did down the wing a little bit. Just barely touching the paper. Just letting the weight of the pastel almost scuffle over the top of the paper. Just want to get some sense of the green that's being reflected down the front of the chest. And sometimes these are colours that I see in the photo reference, and sometimes I exaggerate them. This is what you can play with in the painting process. You can really choose what colours to include. And just looking at the warmth of the shadows as they come around closer towards the light. Just trying to notice every little gradation of colour. And just checking how my highlight colours look against these shadow colours. It's always, as I said at the start, it's good to start to compare. Get some of your brighter colours in there too. And it's surprising just how dark you do need to go in this area. Don't be fooled by thinking that this is still part of a white bird. It really is almost darker than this in some areas on the actual photo reference. So really study the photo reference for the colours. Try not to let your eyes trick you into thinking that you're seeing something that you're not. Really try and look for the colours that are actually there. And of course I'm still doing quite a lot of the work here with the bigger sticks. Still just at the blocking in stage, and it's absolutely fine to have rougher edges on things at this stage. I can come back and neaten so much of what I'm doing. So just while I have a little bit of this very pale lilac tint in my hand, I'll start to pick out a few areas of highlight colour. Just to start and get a feel for the form a little bit better. And apologies if you can hear in my audio the gale force wind that I have outside. I live in an extremely windy town, and it's really difficult to get a few days in a row where you don't have some wind, and it makes recording audio particularly difficult. So I hope that it's not too distracting. So I've just got a bit distracted by the legs here, just helping me have a look at some of these shadows, how they fit together. And of course this big shadow that comes down the edge of the wing, it's really quite important, the shape of it, as it describes a lot of what's going on with the form of the bird. So I've paid a little bit of attention just to the curves. There are some things that don't matter too much that you can skim over and find a quicker way to do it, but there are certain things that you want to pay attention to. So like the shapes of the shadows, for example, all of that's really structural. It's really describing the form of the animal or the bird. But it definitely helps just to start to get some of the light and shade roughly blocked in on the body. And hopefully at the very end I'll have time to come back in and show you how to create some of the little speckles and all of the markings. It really is something you could spend a long time on, but hopefully I'll be able to find a quicker way to get that effect. And certainly on pastel mat it allows so much detail. You could work on for quite a while on a piece, adding more and more layers. So if you're working along with me, and I'm working at quite a fast pace, don't be afraid to pause the video, take your time. Don't feel that you have to work at a fast pace. So it's still looking very patchy, of course. I'm just really looking for all the little important areas where light meets shadow. And then even though you can't see a huge amount of texture on the bird, depending on what scale you're painting in, we're not going to be able to get a huge amount of feathery texture all over. But even just following the grain of the feathers that you can see. So I'm just softening the edge of this shadow. Of course it's still very dark. I need to add some other colours in here. But just getting the edge of it again. And the key a lot of the time with your shadows is to remember that that texture you were creating in the sunlight, that should continue into the shadows. So pick up where I left off very carefully, just dragging some of those marks. Just remembering that the shadow is cutting across the shape of something that is 3D. So just adding some little touches of this blue-violet grey tone in here. So it's still very much about trying to see the form that's underneath all of this light and shade. Because although this shadow line is really prominent in the photo reference, the important structural part of the bird is actually here. That's the back side of the bird here. So this shadow line actually is a bit of an overpowering line, but it really adds to the whole effect, and once we get this nice crisp edge of the white wing in, it'll really make sense.